Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Brayden, and I have a different video to bring to you guys today than what you might be expecting. I threw some Rocket League gameplay up in the background just so you guys would have something to look at, but I want to talk about Helium Network and some of the flaws that I personally think are needing to be addressed within the network. These are just some ideas that I've had that have been looming for a while in my mind. And this is going to be like a very open, just talk about stuff that I think would be cool to see happen to the Helium Network. I want to start by saying that I think for the most part the incentive system works pretty well. Obviously, earnings are supposed to diminish over time, and that just happens naturally with the addition of new people into the network. I think there are other aspects of the incentive system that are fundamentally flawed and deserve to be looked at closely. So to explain my point, let's start by getting a couple things out of the way. You get more H&T depending on the coverage you provide, which is a concept I won't spend too much time explaining as to avoid being redundant. But clear line of sight, strategic placement in view of other hotspots, optimal antenna choice, non-saturated or evenly distributed coverage deployments is the checklist that must be considered when looking to make more H&T over others. So this is relatively tried and true, right? But even those that are within the top percentile of highest earning miners, they've seen their earnings diminish drastically over the last couple of months. Those numbers are very demotivating, and those that strive to build a network with extremely strategic deployments are having second thoughts about setting up another miner. If you strive to hit all the marks on that checklist and saw great earnings only a few months ago, I'm willing to bet you've had at least unsatisfactory thoughts about your earnings today. So where am I going with this? It may seem very debatable, but I want to get the record straight. I'm not saying this is the be-all and end-all solution the network needs to survive. This is just something I've considered that might work as a way to make sure that those that are loyal to the network and that want to provide great coverage remain incentivized to do so. I think the transmit scale system needs to be adjusted. So my understanding is that Helium's network has a system integrated with HIP-17 that introduces a multiplier which affects your earnings based on how redundant your hotspot is, as well as how redundant the hotspots that your hotspot witnesses are. Moreover, every hotspot is given a rating based on how saturated the area they are asserted is. The ratings range from 0.01 to 1.0. This is something that you guys should be familiar with if you've spent a little bit of time involved in the network, right? So let me first explain how your earnings are affected if your own transmit scale is low. For example, if you set up a hotspot in an area where there are multiple hotspots already asserted, say 5 or others within your hexagon, your rewards will be negatively affected and you will be given a lower rating or transmit scale. This means every time you receive mining rewards, they will first consider your transmit scale and you will receive X amount of H&T after it has been calculated with the multiplier. Now to be clear, this doesn't mean that if you have a transmit scale of 0.1 that the scale will multiply your rewards by 0.1. Essentially, this would mean that you'd be missing out on 90% of the potential rewards you could be making. This is just not the case, and in fact, the system is a lot more lenient and complex than that. So now that we've talked about the first aspect of the transmit scale system, I want to talk about the second part. So that being other hotspot transmit scales affect your rewards when you witness them. So for example, if my hotspot were to witness another hotspot, and that hotspot had a very low transmit scale, I would receive a low H&T payout. This is why even the best off-grid rigs overlooking LA that have like 1,000 plus witnesses receive just as much H&T payouts as off-grid rigs overlooking smaller cities. The rig overlooking LA might be getting more witnesses, but all those witnesses are of poor quality because of their transmit scale. The rig overlooking the less saturated city may only get 700 witnesses, but they all have high transmit scales, which would grant better rewards per witness, right? So with all of that explained, hopefully now we have a good understanding of how HIP-17 has affected the network. But what I want to get into now is my actual argument. So I think what needs to happen here is I think the multiplier effect needs to be amplified in order to promote positive growth and more optimal hotspot placement in the network. So for example here, we can take a look at Los Angeles and see how many hotspots are bundled and stacked on top of each other. So a lot of these hexes have double-digit numbers within them, and I don't have to check each resolution to know that this is not ideal placement. Los Angeles is kind of an extreme example, but even smaller cities are seeing hexes with stacks of hotspots. So here's another picture here of San Francisco, which has a much lower population of 900,000 and less ground to cover, and there's a hex with 82 hotspots in it. Granted, some of those hotspots are turned off and earnings are low as they're supposed to be, but I don't think they're as low as they should be. I calculated the average HNT earnings of the hotspots within the hex of 82 miners, making sure to leave out those that had not been asserted for at least a month, as well as the hotspots that were offline, and 60 hotspots met that criteria, leaving only 22 for the survey. So those 22 averaged 0.95 HNT a month. That's roughly 21 helium per month rewarded to hotspots doing virtually nothing for the network. And that's just the single hex. There are plenty other hexes that are extremely saturated spread across the map. Just look up any major city and look through the hexes. I argue that this is because they are not being properly incentivized to stop redundancy. So if we were to implement a more exaggerated multiplier that would go greater lengths to penalize hotspots deploying in hexes like this, while further rewarding hotspots deploying in non-saturated areas, this would create many benefits for the network. Essentially, I think a more competitive reward system would be healthy. One could argue that there are so many hotspots in this single hex that I brought up in San Francisco because they're being used as gateways for a specific IoT project or purpose, right? If a company needs to actually have gateways that they're using in their, 50-story building, that would make sense. But at that point, I don't think the company would actually care about agency incentives if they're using it for their own purposes. So to conclude this part of my TED Talk at this point, I think it'd be extremely beneficial to the network to amplify the effects of the multiplier. I think if the system was working properly, we most likely wouldn't be seeing hexes with 80 plus hotspots deployed on top of each other, right? I mean, that's what the transmit scale system was made for to begin with, to stop and to disincentivize people from deploying on top of each other. Not only would fixing and amplifying the transmit scale system keep people from deploying on top of each other, but it would also allocate more rewards for people that are actually deploying correctly. Like I had mentioned in the San Francisco example, an average of 0.95 helium, or I think it was 21 helium per month, was going to those 82 hotspots, or rather 24 hotspots. And that is just unnecessary completely to be paid out to those people, as their hotspot is just providing nothing. So imagine if you were to take that 21 HNT, or a fraction of it rather, and actually pay it out to hotspots that did deploy correctly. So now that we've looked at that aspect of the helium incentive system, the transmit scale aspect that is, I want to look at another aspect of it. And this is the fact that the system as a whole demotivates coverage providers from deploying in new areas, that is, where there isn't already coverage. So like we previously talked about, all rewards are based on broadcasting beacons, and witnessing other hotspots. This means the entire reward system revolves around being within range of other hotspots, right? So there is no incentive for people to expand to areas that need coverage because there is no incentive for them to do so. So, for example, if I want to set up a few hotspots in a small town that has no coverage yet, I can expect extremely poor rewards because there won't be any other hotspots to witness. Anyone looking to deploy a hotspot would much rather look for a moderately saturated area to deploy because that's where they would make the most H&T. If the network were to implement some sort of incentive system that promoted deploying in areas with no coverage, we could see plenty of hotspots popping up in areas that actually need it. So to support this point, I took some screenshots of Tulare County, an area that could greatly benefit from the use of IoT sensors, being that it's heavily occupied by farmland. So a full range of sensors exists solely for the purpose of making agriculture smarter and more efficient. And I'm not going to go too in depth on why that is, but I will leave some links below on more on agriculture IoT sensors and how they're helping make farming easier, but also be more efficient. So it'd be great to see the adoption of IoT sensors in Tulare County. However, there currently is little to no coverage there aside from major cities in the area. So imagine if there were extra H&T payouts set aside for those that are deploying in new areas. Perhaps I'm thinking like a bounty-oriented system, where those that set out to provide coverage in high priority areas that are requiring it get bonus rewards for doing so. The network could put a bounty on Tulare County, where coverage providers that hunt the bounty and provide coverage there could have some sort of bonus, such as double awards or a flat rate of extra earnings, right? So these bonuses, rather, could be provided until a certain goal for coverage is met. So this is a very rough example, but let's just say, imagine you have a 30 by 30 mile area, and you decide that it's a high priority area that could really benefit from using IoT devices. Well, let's go ahead and put out a bounty in that area and say we're going to provide double earnings for all new sensors, or hotspots rather, that are put up in that area, right? So now that you actually have a good incentive for people to come and deploy hotspots in this area that doesn't have any coverage, once enough people actually come out and do deploy those hotspots, then you can go ahead and take away that extra bonus or bounty. Because at that point, there will be enough hotspots out in this area where incentives will still be good once you take away that extra bonus, because there will be enough hotspots to witness. So that pretty much wraps up this video, guys. I hope you did enjoy this, and I hope it might have opened up some thoughts in your own mind about what's going on within the network and what you think could be changed or improved upon. Overall, the network is in a pretty good spot, and especially being that it is still in its infancy. So I wanted to clarify that these points that I made today are really just spitballing. These aren't things that should be looked at immediately, but they are things that I would like to see considered in the future. If you guys did enjoy this video, please consider leaving a like, and I also strongly suggest that you guys state your opinions down below. Moreover on that, I specifically hope that if there's anything that seems flawed with the points that I made today, I hope that you guys will point them out for me. I don't consider myself like an expert on these topics. Again, these were just ideas that I wanted to throw out there to start a little bit of a discussion. But overall, I hope that you guys did enjoy this video, and I'll end up catching you in the next one. Thanks.